But they are paying literally no attention to the things that I am talking about. The record job losses over the last year, the outward migration over the previous 10 years. These are things that are going to leave New York City devastated from both an economic standpoint and a health standpoint going forward. How's it going, everyone? This is Nick from Reventure Consulting. I'm back here with another Reventure YouTube cast, and today's video I make with a very heavy heart. Today's video is on the decline of New York City and the fact that New York City is finished. It is over. It will never return to the highs of the previous 2 decades. The damage that's being done right now to the city's economy and the damage that was actually being done to the city's economy prior to COVID even happened is causing irreparable long-term harm to New York City, its residents, and its real estate market. And like I said, I make this video with a heavy heart because I grew up just outside of New York City. I went into the city all the time as a kid and a teenager, and I love everything the city has to offer. I'm a big New York sports fan, big Giants fan, big Yankees fan. I love New York, but some really bad things are going on there right now, and they deserve to be talked about because they're not getting talked about. Leadership in New York City and New York State is not focusing on the real problems that are occurring in New York City right now that are going to leave the city destitute and damaged for decades. So in this video, we're going to take a look at what the data has to say about just how bad things are in New York City. So to get things started, we need to talk about the utter economic destruction that is overtaking New York City right now. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. Thousands and thousands of businesses are now closed for good. Lots of businesses have been open for 30, 40 years. Bars, restaurants, entertainment venues, they are closed for good. And as a result, the job situation in New York is terrifying. New York City has lost, get this, 13% of its jobs year over year. So basically, New York's job count in January 2021 is 13% lower than it was in January 2020. So that is 1 out of 8 workers in New York City is jobless, and jobless for going on a year. Those are depression level job loss figures. That shows that New York City's economy is not just in rough shape, it is in horrible shape at levels that it has not experienced since the Great Depression. And to get a sense of just how bad it is, look at this graph, which looks at the year-over-year percentage change in jobs in New York City over the last 3 decades. So you can see that over the last 3 decades, most of the time frame, this line is in blue, meaning that there was job growth, right? 2.6% a year, 2.2% a year. But then you have these kind of little recessions, right? Here we have the 9/11 recession. New York lost 4.3% of its jobs year over year through January 2002. Well, that's not very good. That's a recession. Then you see the great financial crash starting in 08-09. New York lost 3.4% of its jobs year over year through September 2009. So these were, pretty bad recessions. Bad until you then look at COVID over here, where New York has lost 13.3% of its employment year over year. That is 4 times higher than its job losses during the great financial crash and 3 times higher than its job losses during 9/11 and more than 2 times higher during its job losses in the early 90s when New York was not the New York we know it today. It was really struggling. It was a crime-ridden place. So 13.3% job losses, that is just unprecedented for New York City. In nominal terms, it's over 650,000 jobs are eliminated from New York's economy year over year. And many of these jobs are never coming back. But the part about this that's really concerning is not just the last year. It's the last 10 years. Because even prior to COVID, New York City was in decline. That's right. So even prior to March 2020, New York City was in decline. Tons and tons of people, hundreds of thousands of people were deciding to move out of the city, move out of Manhattan, move out of Brooklyn, go to Long Island, go to Westchester, or go to Florida, go to Texas, go to California. Hundreds of thousands of people were already making that decision prior to COVID. And they were making that decision because New York City's economic opportunity, especially for the poor and middle class, to be honest, it's been really bad for a while. I mean, if you're a poor middle class person working a service job in New York, you're probably paying 40 to 50% of your income on your rent. And that's just not a good situation for growth and socioeconomic mobility. And so even prior to COVID, hundreds of thousands of people were moving out of New York City. And like COVID did with everything else, right? It took an existing trend that was happening. You know, you saw that with e-commerce, work from home. It took an existing trend and merely accelerated it. And that's exactly what it did with New York. New York was already in decline. COVID hit. Leadership made some really stupid decisions. And then that just opened the floodgates on the exodus from New York City. And to put numbers to it, take a quick look at this map. We're looking at the 5 boroughs in New York City: Bronx, Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island. And what the number you see on this map is the net domestic migration out of New York City from 2010 to 2019. So this data is from 2010 to 2019, and it measures how many more people moved out than moved in. If you guys are enjoying the data presented in this video, please hit subscribe down below. Please also make sure to like the video and comment on the video. I love when you guys engage with this content. I love providing this data for you guys, so please make sure to like and comment on the video. Also, I just started an Instagram at reventure_consulting. That's at reventure_consulting on Instagram. Please follow me on there. I post content every single day, graphs and data every single day on Instagram. So please follow me on there. All right, let's get back to the video. So in the case of Brooklyn, minus 301,000. That means that 300,000 more people moved out of Brooklyn to other parts of the US than moved into Brooklyn from other parts of the US. So you see Brooklyn's population of 2019 of 2.6 million. It could have been 300,000 higher if it did not have this negative migration. Queens, much the same. It lost 266,000 people to domestic migration from 2010 to 2019. The Bronx lost 190,000 people. Manhattan lost 128,000 people. So nearly 1 million people left the city for other parts of the country over the 9 years from 2010 to 2019. And this is super important to realize. This data is through 2019, has nothing to do with COVID and the resulting recession. This is all trends that were occurring prior to COVID. And now you're starting to see the real failings in New York City leadership. Mayor Bill de Blasio, Governor Cuomo, all they talk about is COVID. A year later, 10 months after New York City had its COVID crisis, we're now 10 months into New York having very low COVID deaths. All they still talk about, for the most part, is new COVID variants, COVID positivity rate. And of course, COVID matters, right? It's a huge health crisis. It deserves attention. But they are paying literally no attention to the things that I am talking about. The record job losses over the last year, the outward migration over the previous 10 years. These are things that are going to leave New York City devastated from both an economic standpoint and a health standpoint going forward. When people are unemployed for more than 6 months, their life expectancy declines permanently by 2 years. Your incidences of alcoholism, depression, and suicide go way up if you're long-term unemployed. Also think about tax revenue. Wealthy people are fleeing the city, and that's tax revenue that New York City isn't going to collect anymore. So social services are going to take a hit. New York City is going to get screwed all around for not just the next year or two, for decades because of the decisions that New York City's leadership is making right now. I mean, after all, just yesterday, Bill de Blasio went on TV and he said, I think we need to slow the reopening. We need to stop restaurant capacity at 50%. We can't go higher than that. Here we are with heavy vaccine rollouts. Now pretty much in most places, most people who want a vaccine can get it. Yet the mayor is still saying no reopening. How do you look New Yorkers in the face? How do you look the 1 in 8 workers in the face who have lost a job over the last year and recommend a policy like that? Now, my channel is real estate related, so let's get into some real estate data. How is the job losses and the outward migration, how is that impacting real estate values in New York? And there's a bit of a narrative going on right now that the New York City already experienced the worst. That was in August of 2020, September of 2020. That was the trough of New York's real estate market, and that things are only going to get better since then. Well, that opinion is flat out wrong. There's huge downside to New York City's economy that isn't being paid attention to right now for the reasons I just described. And the job losses aren't really being felt in New York's economy because of the fiscal stimulus, unemployment assistance, as well as the eviction and foreclosure moratoriums. People who've lost their jobs are getting checks, thankfully so. And they're also being allowed to stay in their apartment if they haven't paid rent. And they're being allowed to stay in their home if they haven't paid their mortgage. All good short-term things. However, at some point, these are going to run out, probably in the middle to end of this year. And that's when you're going to see the real pain in New York City's real estate market take over. We're talking huge value declines, huge rent declines. And the thing is, these things were already happening prior to COVID. So this graph is a little messy, but stay with me. Let me explain it. So each line on this graph is a different zip code in New York City. And what we're looking at is the percentage change in annual real estate values in the zip code over the last decade. So let me just pick a random point here. November 2013, 10032 experienced 21% appreciation from the previous year in November 2013. Huge appreciation. And that's what you see by these kind of blue lines here. July 2014, 10026, 18% appreciation. And you can see basically from 2013 to 2016, every line was blue. Every zip code was appreciating in the mid 2010s. But then we see something funny start happening in 2016. We see more of these lines start to turn red. And what red means is a value decline. So for instance, November 2017, 10002, that zip code experienced an 11% decline in values year over year in November 2017. Like almost 3 years prior to COVID, this zip code was really struggling. And what you could see is that, this dotted lines when COVID occurred, New York's real estate market was already in trouble prior to COVID. Lots and lots of zip codes were hemorrhaging value. I mean, even like 10037, December 2019, 3 months prior to COVID, 18% decline in prices year over year. So just look at all of these zip codes that had price declines from 2017 to 2020. Then, of course, COVID hit, and you could tell things do get a little worse. But to be honest, during COVID, the price declines don't look that different from about the year prior to COVID. Lots and lots of zip codes below this line experiencing declines in real estate values. So New York's real estate market has actually been in the tank, not just for the last year, but for the last 4 years. New York's real estate market, particularly Manhattan's real estate market, has been in severe decline over the last 4 years due to the secular demographic trends that I was describing before. All the outward migration out of the city is resulting in a softer real estate market. Now you throw in COVID, you throw in 13% job losses year over year. Now the real estate market is going to face real pain. We're not talking 5 to 10% declines. I think real estate prices in New York are probably going to go down by 20, 25% in upcoming years. Because quite simply, the economic justification for living in New York City is not there anymore. When you are experiencing an economic depression in your city, real estate values are going to continue to go down. And I just go back to that point about fiscal stimulus, unemployment assistance, eviction and foreclosure moratoriums. All of those things are good things, helping people in need, but they are hiding the realities of the economy from the real estate market. At some point in mid to late 2021, the realities of New York City real estate market are going to take over, and I suspect there's going to be a real estate crash sometime in the next year in New York where values are going to go even lower. And to be honest, maybe that's what New York City needs, because even with the price declines of the last 4 years, rents and values and prices in New York are still ridiculous compared to how much money people make in the city. I mean, after all, lots and lots of zip codes in New York, the typical home price is more than 10 times the typical income, more than 10 times. So if you make 100,000, expect to pay well over $1 million for your home. If you make 50,000, expect to pay over 500,000 for your home. In some cases, the price to income ratios are as high as 15 to 20 times higher than what people make. And so what that says is that there's no bargains right now in New York City for most people. I mean, maybe if you're some, rich software developer or Wall Street banker making millions of dollars a year, you're like, oh, I'll buy some real estate right now. But for most people, the 90% of people that comprise New York City, things are still really, really expensive. So actually, New York City needs a real estate crash so things can become more affordable for everyone and make the city more equitable. Because right now the city is really just turning into a playground for wealthy millennial and middle-aged people. If you earn a lot of money, you're disconnected from a lot of the realities I'm describing in this video. If you earn a lot of money, you probably don't care as much about, the worker in the, the souvenir store who's unemployed because there's no tourism in New York City right now. Like, you're not really connected to that, but that's a reality. And those are the people that make New York City what it is. The service workers, the poor and middle class families, they instill the values and energy of New York City. And it's not until New York City real estate values and rents come down significantly that those people are going to have a value proposition to want to stay in the city. And I want to end this by looking at one more piece of data, and that is related to New York City public transportation use. And this is a great real-time indicator of New York's economic activity. If people are taking the train, it means they're probably going to work, or they're going to a restaurant, or they're going to buy something, or they're seeing a friend, they're going out someplace. Subway ridership, public transportation use in New York City is a great thing. After all, only I think 20 to 30% of people in New York City own a car, so almost everyone else relies on public transportation. And the really unfortunate thing is that over the last year, New York's public transportation use hasn't come close to rebounding. Prior to COVID, over 5 million people per day rode subways in New York City. 5 million people per day would swipe their MTA card and get on the subway. Right now, that level is about 1.5 million per day. It's 70% lower than the pre-COVID peak, and we are now a year into COVID, and we're still 70% lower. And you can see that represented here on this graph. So we're looking at the daily subway ridership in New York. If we go, early on in March of 2020, you could see there were about 5.5 million people per day. And then by April, that just collapsed down to about 500,000 people per day. So it collapsed by 90% after COVID hit in April. Now there was a gradual increase in subway ridership, in June, July, we're going up, then September, October. In October, it kind of peaked, 1.6 million in October. But the unfortunate thing is that basically since then, subway ridership has stalled. There's been no improvement in the amount of people taking the subway in New York City over the last 6 months. Absolutely no improvement. October, November, December, January, February, March. We're still in March 2021, 1.6, 1.7 million. We're at the same levels we were in October 2020. And that's a real sign of a cause for concern. The lifeblood of New York City is its public transportation, its subway system, and people are not taking it. That is a sign of multiple things. That's a sign of a lot of people moving out of the city permanently. That's a sign of the economic destruction that's occurred in New York City. And that's a sign of maybe also changing tastes and habits that are occurring within people in New York City. They're going out less, they're getting used to going out less, and it's going to take a really long time for this number to get back to the 5.5 million experienced a year ago. I'm thinking this is going to take at least a decade to recover. So, in summary, New York City is facing an economic crisis like it never has before. Job losses of 13% year over year. People who are unemployed for over 1 year, long-term unemployed. Tons and tons of businesses closing forever and leaving the city. Also, wealthy people deciding, I don't like the taxes in New York. I don't like not being able to do what I want. I'm leaving. I'm going to Florida. I'm going to California. All of these things are combining to put New York City in an absolute crisis right now. And it's a shame that that crisis is not getting more attention from New York City's leadership, because it's going to be with New York City for the next decade. New York City is going to struggle. Its social services are going to erode. Its what little economic equality existed before is going to erode, and its real estate market is going to crash. So those are the things that are likely going to happen in New York unless leadership can take a proactive approach in being pro-growth, pro-vitality, pro-business, pro-tourism, pro-people coming back to New York. That's what New York needs right now more than anything else. I hope you guys enjoyed the data in this video. I really love sharing this data with you guys. I focus a lot on real estate. I focus a lot on economics and demographics. If you like this content, please hit subscribe down below. I put out about 2 videos per week. Definitely subscribe, like, comment on the videos. Also, I just started an Instagram. I post content every day on Instagram, a new graph, a new video every single day. So make sure to follow me on Instagram at @reventure reventure_consulting. That's at reventure_consulting on Instagram. Looking forward to seeing you on there. All right, until next time, this is Nick from Reventure Consulting signing off.